Greetings, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to session number 3 on day 2 of this conference. The title of this session is GCC Monetary Policy, Prices and Finance in the Wake of COVID-19. My name is Kharfi. I teach at the American University of Sharja in the United Arab Emirates. We have 2 distinguished speakers and a lead discussant. The first paper is by Dr. Ahmed, I believe, Ahmed Al-Zayed, who is going to talk about financial stability and monetary policy reaction evidence from the GCC countries. The paper is co-authored with Nader Naifar and Samia Nasreen. The second paper is by Dr. Ismail Janj, who is going to discuss financial stability and emerging markets, currency interconnectedness in the aftermath of the Great Recession. What I will do is present this brief biography of the speakers, and that we have, I believe, about 60 minutes. That's correct, Shireen, I think. This session is 60 minutes. So it's going to be 20 minutes presentation for each presenter, followed by 5 to 10 minute discussion by Dr. Mouawiya. And then we can open the floor to the audience to make comments or ask questions. If I may introduce Dr. Ahmed. He's an associate professor in financial economics at Durham University in the UK. He's also a research fellow of the ERF and an associate editor on the editorial team of Helion. He has his PhD from Leeds University, and his main research interests are in the areas of monetary economics and international financial markets. Our second speaker is Dr. Ismail Janj, who is a professor of economics at the American University of Sharjah, he also teaches economics and does research in the areas of monetary policy and with focus on exchange rates. He has a PhD from Texas A&M. I just want to make a note that I will let the presenters, or alert the presenters at the 10-minute mark and perhaps at the 2-minute mark, in order to keep the time in check. Without further ado, I would like to invite our first speaker, Dr. Ahmed, to present his paper, please. Thank you. Dr. Ahmed.
And I think today,
Dr. Ahmed, you're breaking up. Dr. Ahmed?
Can you hear me?
Well, we need to say something to be sure we hear you.
I think there's a problem with the connectivity. We can't hear you. No, we can't hear you. Do you want to log out and log in again?
Can we start with Ismail Samar
Yeah, I think so. If we may.
until Ahmed fixes the issue?
Dr. Samer.
Samir, you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm muted. Yes, I was going to suggest the same thing. I'm happy with that. Yes.
Actually, that is very good because I have just the next section in which, session, since I'm giving the test, I say sections, in which I am the discussant, so I have to move to the next session actually as quick as I can. So let me try to share my screen. Which one? Share screen, okay. So I'm gonna share the screen. You guys tell me if you can see my screen.
Looks perfect, thank you.
Good. Now I'm gonna put it in presentation mode and let you tell me if it is in the presentation mode for you as well.
It is.
Okay. So this is a paper really talking about the currency connectedness amongst a number of countries. The paper is very, very, in its very, very rudimentary level stage. So any comments from Mouawiya or anybody else would be more than appreciated. By the way, I don't know if Muhammad is online, but anything good in this paper is from me. Anything bad is from him. I will present the paper. Muhammad has to answer the questions. By the way, my last name is pronounced Genç, which means young, so I'm young forever. Just don't look at my face. All right, so let's move on then. Here's my. So what is this paper about? Well, the paper looks at the connectedness in the way the exchange rate markets affecting other countries' exchange rate markets. And that becomes obviously particularly important if it is in the aftermath of a crisis. The Great Recession is for us and a financial crisis, but unfortunately turned economic later on. So we would like to basically concentrate on 5 countries. These 5 countries, at least according to some people, are known as Fragile 5. And that club, so to speak, does not really remain constant forever and ever. It keeps changing. I don't know if we can still have the same club, but at least in 2016, at least one person called this Fragile 5. That is Brazil, India, Indonesia, South Africa, and Turkey. So why Forex markets? Because these markets are probably connected, and I shouldn't say that. These markets can be potentially connected because of the international investors. Now, as I tell my students all the time, I'm now speaking English, though normally I should be speaking Economies. But for the sake of everybody's understanding, I'm going to use the word investor, even though in economics, investor has a special meaning. So the 2008 data are within our radar, but we have some data also from 2020. So which means that we have some relevance to the current crisis as well. We're going to be looking at the connectedness within the framework of Diebold-Yilmaz model. And if you are pressed in time, you don't want to listen to my boring talk until the end of the presentation, then you can go away by knowing that actually the biggest contributor to shocks in the currency of the country is actually that country itself. So why is that important? Obviously, there's academic interest, at least as much as Mohammed and I got interested. So that must be some academic interest. And obviously policymakers are interested because they want to know if something happens to Turkish currency, would that affect Indian currency, etc. So investors naturally are affected, and investor over here, as I said, is in English, not Economics. That means that if somebody has an international portfolio, obviously they are interested. So speaking of international portfolios, obviously in the modern age, thanks to online investing, etc., international investors keep reshuffling their portfolios, and that is a potential avenue for interactions among different countries. And by the way, that can potentially also lead to the spread of problems in one currency market into another. In other words, I'm talking about contagion. So this problem exacerbates as a result of an economic crisis, becomes even worse if this crisis is global. And there is research which shows that emerging markets are more prone to be impacted by contagion. And maybe I should have said this last point first. And I know that I'm driving Mouawiya crazy because I did not send him the paper. The paper is so ridiculous that I kind of felt embarrassed to send it to Mouawiya. Maybe Mouawiya thinks still I'm a scholar, so I did not want to destroy that image. So this last point should have been said actually up after the first point, where one reason why contagion could be an issue is because international investors keep reshuffling their portfolios. Second connectivity vehicle perhaps is the dollar, US dollar. So US dollar seems to be the anchor currency for all of these currencies that we're interested in, but also many other currencies. That's another vehicle of transmission of problem in one currency, perhaps in two other markets. So fragile five. As I said, that definition came from an article in the Economist, actually. And these countries that I mentioned before are too dependent on foreign investment for their economic growth and financial growth too, definitely. So that makes them very fragile to the changes in financial situation in the world, especially exchange rate. And most of these countries have convertible currencies, to my knowledge. That means that capital may come in pretty quickly and may leave pretty quickly as well. And this shows more in terms of portfolio investment than direct foreign direct investment. So that of course causes a lot of fluctuation, volatility in the foreign exchange markets. And obviously these countries have certain problems which are pretty common among them all, not necessarily because of a connection, but because of their vulnerability to fluctuations in foreign capital, such as high inflation, current account deficit, low growth. These are some of the problems that these countries have. So again, that makes them probably pretty good candidates for Fragile Five. Again, there are other clubs as well. I forget the names, but I mean, once these acronyms, etc., starts popping up, you can see many of examples of the same nature. Instead of Fragile 5, there was another thing, Club of 10 or something, which includes some of Fragile 5 that have similar common characteristics in international sphere. So this is one club, but I can guarantee to you that it is today probably we can find that some of these countries are out of that club. All right. So what happened in the literature regarding the contagion issue, starting with Engel's 1982 paper. And obviously we have a lot of literature already accumulated for international economic crises, but they usually deal with developed economies. So we know the impact, we know the cost. I shouldn't say we know. We have some idea about the causes of economic crises in developed economies and the outcomes of those crises. I cannot obviously say that we're very, very knowledgeable about financial crises. I mean, I always take comfort in the words of Schiller, Yale economist who won Nobel Prize on his contribution to the understanding of financial markets, where he said, before every economic crisis, financial markets sink. I'm paraphrasing him, of course. Financial markets sink, and we don't know why. So if Schiller doesn't know, I think I am forgiven for not knowing. So, but we know that another club, BRICS, which also includes some of the countries in the Fragile 5, as far as stock markets are concerned, are pretty much connected to the US stock market. In another paper that I did with my two former students, by the way, if I may brag about US economics, I can tell you that our students are part and parcel of our research. So that's a little bit of a commercial over there. So what we found was that there is a connection between GCC markets and the US in terms of financial side, but not economic side. As a matter of fact, in the paper, we did not use the word connectedness, we used decoupling, which is just the opposite of connectedness. So there are other papers. Latin American countries are more susceptible to US monetary policy, and financial markets are more connected, yes, like the one that we did for the GCC versus US. And financial crises have impact on Fragile 5, but not the same way on all of them, because even though those countries have some characteristics common, they also have different characteristics too. And Brazil, among the Fragile 5, is found to be most fragile, at least according to some authors. And,
Dr. Ismail, 10 minutes, please. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
No, you just want to make me finish before I even finish my presentation, right, Samir? Okay, so anyways, obviously, as I was saying, the Fragile 5 has shown some characteristics which make them more susceptible to problems happening in one versus the other. But let's see how strong that connection is. So speaking of connections, once again, we'll look at the foreign exchange markets of Fragile 5, and we use Diebold Yilmaz framework, where we'll look at the forecast error variance and calculated connectedness via that. To our knowledge, there is no other paper which looks at Fragile 5 via DY method. So we're being very careful here. We don't say there is no other paper about this topic. We just say not about the Fragile Five and not using DY together. So I think we're being pretty conservative there. We have exchange rate data, pretty long daily data. As you probably can see that our data lasts till mid-2020, which qualifies us to say something about the current crisis as well. And we're thinking to expand the data span further, obviously that now we have data to be able to more authoritatively, if we can, talk about the current crisis as well. Data come from Bloomberg. All right. So we're going to be looking at the we're going to be looking at returns, but these are in the financial return sense, where we define return as the first difference of exchange rate vis-a-vis US dollar. And we're going to be looking at increases in that exchange rate and decreases in the exchange rate. Increases meant to be depreciation and decreases meant to be appreciation. Why is that good? If you look at it from the international investor perspective, then depreciation would make the portfolio worth less. So they may, international investor may not like it. But I can already see Mouawiya making the notes and saying, how about the country itself? The country, of course, wants depreciation. I know that, Mouawiya, before you fire at me, I accept and I surrender on that regard. Okay, so the returns, as you see, pretty much centered around zero. It doesn't mean that they're zero. They're not white noise, obviously. That's why we have to be careful about these returns. And if I may summarize those data that I showed you in the previous slide, I can say that averages are roughly around zero. Differences in standard deviation are a sign that we have volatility. As a matter of fact, if you look at the range between the maximum and minimum, the most volatile currency seems to be the Turkish currency. Then we have South African, Brazilian, Indonesian, and Indian currencies listed. The least volatile currency is Indian currency among the Fragile Five. And so if I may say a few words about the Y method, and not much, Samer, so don't worry, I'm going to be quick. What we are simply doing is to look at forecast error variance and shock one variable and see how that shock affects all other variables. So we have to start with a covariance stationary VAR process. And by the way, we did not use Cholesky decomposition because, you know, Cholesky or Koleski, whichever one is the correct pronunciation, obviously is susceptible to the ordering of the variables. By using this other one championed by Pesaran and Shin, we are using the generalized variance decomposition. And so, obviously, again, we would like to see how shocks in one country's exchange rate affect other countries' exchange rate. So basically, this is what we're doing. And we're going to calculate statistics called the contribution of one country's shock to the other country's forecast error variance, and the opposite, all the shocks that one country receives from other countries. So that's what we're going to be looking at. Okay, and the Y method, basically, I guess the neat part of the Y method is to calculate a very simple spillover effect, index rather, I'm sorry. And that's, as I say, you see in the formula over here, very simple mathematical average of impact of one variable on all, or the impact of one variable receives from them all, etc. So if this index is 0, then we say the system is completely independent of each other. No matter what happens in one currency, in our case, it has nothing to do with other currencies. That's one extreme. The other extreme, that index is unity. That means that if something happens to one currency, it exactly affects every other currency. That means that these countries cannot really make their policies, exchange rate policies, in isolation of other countries. All right. So like any other good time series economist, we do our unit root tests as we should. And we looked at ADF, KPSS. Actually, we look at some other statistics too. But basically, these are the two ends of the spectrum of unit root tests. That's why I'm not presenting other tests here, but we've done them. So the variables are unit root. Why do I care about it? For those of you in time series, you know that we have to have covariant stationary variables to have a VAR process. We choose a VAR with 2 legs, as you can see from here. The optimum leg, at least according to Schwarz criterion, is 2. So that's what we chose. These are impulse response functions, not DY method, but again, being good old time series econometricians, we just look at these things. And obviously, you can see that the interaction periods are very, very short. So that, again, is an indication that forecast variance is not going to be that strongly affecting other variables. And here is the total spillover connectedness index for all countries, calculated via the DY method using the formulas I previously mentioned. And as you can very see here through the green colored cells, the biggest contribution to all countries come from themselves. And at the right bottom corner of this table, you see that the interaction among countries is quite small, actually. By the way, there is no statistical test how significant that interaction is.
2 minutes, please.
Huh?
2 minutes, please.
2 minutes, okay. So anyways, we see that if you exclude the own contribution, South African currency seems to affect other currencies more than everything else, then Brazil, then Indonesian currencies. But even those impacts, as you see over there, numerically speaking, are very small. And total contribution of South African currency is even totally very small. Again, this means that these fragile 5 are not all that connected. I've also, I'm showing you over here, net pairwise directional spillover. Again, if I may just very quickly say that Indian, Indonesian, and Turkish currencies are the receiving end of the shocks, whereas South African and Brazilian currencies transmit the shock. However, let me be quick that, as you see, these numbers are very, very small. So probably the feedback is very, very small. So here, I will say a few words over here without going into technical details. As you see in this, we have increased dynamic connectedness around 2004, 2008, 2011. Our data for 2020 is not complete, but again, you see by looking at the graph, the connectedness increases. When connectedness increases, this is a sign of unease. The markets are not comfortable about what they see. And anything happens in one market seems to affect other markets also. Around the crisis times, you see connectedness increases way higher than what we saw the static connectedness. Okay, and last thing that I'm going to finish by saying that obviously for bad news, the connectedness seems to be higher. That again means that the investors seem to be acting together. And we, last couple of slides, Samir, let me know if I have any time left.
Few seconds only, thank you.
Okay. The reason why we're obtaining these results is probably the nature of the economy in Brazil, which is very much dependent on exports, so commodity prices. And India manufactured goods, but India has a very low trade openness, and that may shield its currency from international shocks. And I guess that's all I'm going to say. And as I said, if Mohammed is here, obviously he's going to answer all the questions because he's the one who did the errors in this paper. And I'm the one who did everything right in this paper. That's all. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Ismail. I suggest that we perhaps leave the questions and also the opinion of the discussant until after the second paper, so that we give our second presenter, Dr. Ahmed Al-Sayed, an equal opportunity. Dr. Ahmed, the floor is yours. Would you like to share your slides?
Yes, thank you so much for the presentation and giving me the opportunity to present my project. I do apologize about the previous issue with the connectivity. You know, never trust technology.
Sure. In case you joined later, I just wanted to mention that you will have 20 minutes and I will alert you at the 10-minute mark and then the 2-minute mark.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I believe you can see my my PowerPoint presentation at the moment, and let me start by these projects. So it's the title is Financial Stability and Monetary Policy Reaction Evidence from the GCC Economies. This project is a joint project with our colleague Nader Naifar and Samia Nisreen. And we have the pleasure to present this project in the ERF conference today. I will just start with a brief introduction about the topic, the research question, and what we are doing in this paper. So we all know that is monetary policy before the global financial crisis was mainly focusing on the inflation targeting. And at the time of the financial crisis and later on, there has been a great change and shift on objective of the monetary policy around the world, moving on, shifting from inflation targeting more on to the financial stability objectives. And as we recall and have seen, that is the expansionary monetary policy for a pretty longer time period before the global financial crisis has contributed a lot into excessive increase in credit markets and the creation of the bubble and building up the bubble during the global financial crisis 2007-2008. So by the global financial crisis and by that time, most of the policy maker and the economists realize that is financial and monetary policy has something to do with the financial stability. So financial stability has become a more concern and the key objective of the monetary policy and the central banks around the world. Also, we have seen that the current COVID-19 pandemic has already shed more lights on the importance of the monetary policy and the manipulation of monetary policy tool in order to achieve both economic as well as financial stability. So during the start of the pandemic, we have seen that there has been a great lockdown around the world. We have seen a drop in economic activities, shutting down most of the borders between countries, which actually affecting financial markets. And also we have seen a higher connectivity and financial transmission and contagion around the world during this COVID-19 and because of this health pandemic. I'm very grateful for Ismail for starting his very good presentation about the financial contagion and the connectedness, which actually shed more lights on these topics. So thank you so much for sharing your experience. So given this background, actually this has motivated our interest in this topic, and the idea of analyzing the performance and the interaction between the financial stability and the monetary policy reaction in the GCC economies by introducing a financial instability index that can monitor the financial vulnerability and the crisis within those countries. Starting and motivating also the study by looking at the literature review. So we start to look at the literature review, and we have seen that is monetary policy and financial stability has a very complicated relationship, and actually an ambiguous relationship that is keep changing from one country to another, and also from one period to another. But generally speaking, the financial stability and monetary policy have several channels through which they are interact. One of these channels is the credit market channel, the exchange rate channel, the financial flow channel between the markets, as well as the money supply channel. So there are several channels through which both monetary policy and financial stability interact together. Going back to one of the aerial papers that looked at this issue, so we have Pairwise and Lowy in 2004 examined the financial stability, a relationship between financial stability and monetary policy reaction in 4 advanced economies, Australia, Japan, US, and Germany, based on a modified Taylor rule, and the result actually confirmed that there is a negative or ambiguous relationship between these 2 variables for all the country except for the US. There was a clear cut that is US has a very concern and specific targeting and specific object for the monetary policy rule in terms of targeting inflation. Another study by Grenville and Malik in 2009 studied the linkage between monetary policy and financial stability. They find the pro-cyclicality between the monetary and financial condition in the long run, where monetary stability is an essential precondition for achieving the financial stability. So in that sense, financial stability considered to be an outcome of the monetary policy stability and the monetary aggregate stability, or in other words, financial inflation targeting. By having an stability in terms of the level of inflation, we will be able to achieve financial stability as well. However, this literature review and those type of argument that is financial targeting is much more important and should be the key objective of the central bank. That type of argument has changed completely in the wake of the global financial crisis, and more specifically after the global financial crisis. So looking at the literature during this period after the crisis, Apolosco in 2013 assessed the impact of financial instability on the European Central Bank monetary policy decision. using backward-looking monetary policy or backward Taylor rule. And they find that the financial instability has a negative influence on interest rate. Right. Also, BIC in 2016 studied the interaction between financial stability and monetary policy in the US. They find financial stability should be an important player of the monetary policy. So they emphasize the fact that is after the global financial crisis, the central bank has put more emphasis on the achieving the objective of financial stability rather than monetary stability and inflation targeting. In a similar study also, Kamilika in 2016 investigated the response of the Turkish central bank to financial distress using a composite index of the system stress, so similar to what we have done. So they construct a financial stress index and augmented the Taylor rule with the index to see the impact and the interaction between the monetary policy and the financial stability. And the result indicate that is central bank or Turkish central bank response to financial system stress has increased and it changed after the global financial crisis or after 2010, focusing more on the financial stability goal. So this is actually, again, confirming our intuitive thinking that is before the financial crisis, most of the central bank was focusing on inflation targeting. However, this has been changed after the global financial crisis to shift into the focus on the financial stability rather than inflation targeting and price stability. A similar study by Zana in 2021, a very recent study applying a Bayesian model approach to for interest rate to explain the European Central Bank monetary policy before and after the global financial crisis. And they find that is inflation is the main driver of the monetary policy decision and the monetary policy tool in the post-crisis period. However, after the global financial crisis, the monetary policy has been shifted to financial stability objective and the achieve of financial stability.
10 minutes, Dr. Ahmed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. I'll be as quick as I can. So technically speaking, and just to in a nutshell, the contribution of this study, we have two main contributions. The first one is constructing a composite index of the financial stability that can provide an indicator of the soundness of the financial system in the GCC country. Also, to the best of our knowledge, that this is the first paper to investigate the interaction between monetary policy and financial stability in the GCC economies. So starting by looking at the model specification and Taylor rule, we know that is the first time that is Taylor presented his rule in his paper in 1993, where he relates inflation rates into the change in the expected inflation rate as well as the output gap. So if the inflation is higher than the 2% rate, or if the output is higher than the potential output, this will have a positive impact on interest rate, and the Fed's funds rate should be increased. However, this rule has been criticized because it doesn't take into account several factors, which actually developed in his paper in 1998 by introducing another two variable, which is, as we can see here, it's the buy star, which is the inflation targeting rate, as well as the equilibrium real interest rate, RFT. But again, once again, this has been criticized by the literature because it's ignoring one of the key factors that it can affect the monetary policy by the central bank, which is actually the changes in interest rate. So in his paper in 1999, Taylor has augmented the rule again by including the exchange rate. And following on from this, there has been several paper that is augmented Taylor rule in order to test several hypotheses. In this paper, we are following the same approach by Ghosh in 2016, Caporella in 2018, and we relate the monetary policy decision and the interest rate to the gap of inflation. And here we are looking at the forward-looking Taylor rule, that is the expected inflation, or the deviation of the expected inflation from the inflation target would have a positive impact on the central bank interest rate, as well as output gap, exchange rate. And we augmented this rule by adding the financial stress index that we have constructed for those countries. Quickly looking at the variable and the data used, we have at the beginning we have quite ambitious to include all the GCC country, but as we all know, that is dealing with the data from emerging market is quite challenging. So we end up with collecting data for 4 GCC economies, which is Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. The data has been collected are the short-term money market rate, inflation rate, the real GDP, the real effective exchange rate, and those data has been collected on a quarterly basis from the International Financial Statistics report, as well as DataStream. The period range from the 4th quarter of 2006 up to the 2nd quarter of 2020, and the sample as well as the period has been determined by the data availability, as I mentioned. So our first step here is to construct the financial stress indices for our choosing country. And in order to construct those indices, we have followed the literature, but also we have tried to be a more comprehensive as much as we can, right, based on the data availability. So we try to collect data from all segments of the financial market and the financial system. So we include a variable for the banking sector, the equity market, bond market, as well as the exchange rate market, as you can see. And we standardize those variables, and we use equally weighted approach in order to combine and construct aggregated indices. So looking at these aggregated indices for our 4 countries, we will be able to see that is, all right, our indices is doing a great job and able to capture the period of financial stress or financial turbulence around the world, and as well as in the home country. So you will be able to see the high shift in the indices during the 2008-2007, the global financial crisis in the 4 countries. Also, you will be able to see that is also some spikes starting from 2015 up until 2017 or 18 because of the political issue within the GCC country and the conflict between Qatar and the other GCC countries as well. So this also has an impact on the financial soundness of those countries. So moving forward, this is just an idea to give you that our index is a good capture of the financial condition on those countries. So we augmented Taylor rule with our financial stress indices, and we start by looking at the stationarity properties of the variable used in our models. And as we have discussed, we find out that our variable has mixed level of integration. So some variables are stationary at level, some others are stationary at the first difference, which actually motivate the use of autoregressive distributed lag model, which actually had the advantage of dealing with a mixed level of integration of the variable compared with something like VAR, which actually enforce the stationarity of all variables. So the first step in terms of applying ARDL model is looking at the bounds contegration test to see whether the variable are contegrated or not. And by estimating F statistics for bounds contegration test, we see that is F statistics is higher than the upper bound at 1% significance level, which actually confirmed that if there is a co-integration or there is an integration between the variable for each of our countries. So the variable within the ARDL model are co-integrated for the case of Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and United Arab Emirates, which actually motivate us to move into the second or the next step, which actually estimating the error correction model and the short-run dynamics of the relationship between those variables. I'm not going through, given our time constraint, I'm not going through the dynamics in the short run, because as you can see, there is a lot of coefficients and variable to be commented, but actually given the nature of our topic, that is, we are more concerned about the reaction of the monetary policy to financial stability, which is actually a more long-term concern rather than a short-term interest. So moving on and looking at the long run. All right, doctor, thank you. Looking at the long run relationship, we will be able to see that is interest rate is actually responding positively. So as we're looking at here, so for the case of Bahrain, you will see that there is interest rate is respond positively to the inflation gap. So if this indicates that is the monetary authority in Bahrain is targeting inflation, and if there is any change in the expected inflation in the future, they manipulate and they change interest rate to keep the inflation targeting at a certain level. Similarly, which is the case for Kuwait as well, right, but not for the United Arab Emirates, because as you can see here, it's a negative relationship. Looking at our second variable, which is the output gap, ironically, we will see that is output gap coefficient is only significance for the case of Saudi Arabia. So output gap only have an impact, or the monetary policy changes respond to the change in the output gap in the case of Saudi Arabia. Moving over to the exchange rate, again, it's the same. It's a Saudi Arabia, which is significance at 5% only. So you will see that is the changes in the monetary policy tool to output gap as well as the exchange rate is technically speaking is a major concern for the Saudi Arabia, but not for the other countries. And finally, moving on to our final variable, which is actually the variable of interest, which is the financial stress index, we will be able to see that is here at this stage, we decided to see the positive and negative change, the impact of positive and negative changes of financial stress indices on the monetary policy reaction. Whether the monetary policy reaction would change during financial stress period with a high financial stress compared with a very smooth and calm period. And we will see that is all right for most all of countries. All right, there is a negative impact of the financial stress indices on the monetary policy reaction in all countries except for Saudi Arabia. So you will see that is Bahrain, Kuwait, and United Arab Emirates, all monetary policy and the central bank response to the financial stress and financial stress period by changing their central bank interest rates. However, this is not the case for the Saudi Arabia. Finally, I just would like to comment on the diagnostics test for those nonlinear ARDR model. So you will see that is all models have a very high R square. The error correction term for this model is actually negative and less than 1, and they are all all significance, which actually confirm the soundness of those error correction models. Also, there is no autocorrelation, there is no heteroscedasticity, and also using the cumulative sum and the cumulative sum square has actually confirmed that those models are stable, right? But not the case for the United Arab Emirates when we look at the cumulative sum square. But actually, the cumulative sum square looks at the cumulative sum is stable, but not for the cumulative sum squares.
Concluding
so my
remark,
final,
please, Dr. Ahmed.
yes, the conclusion of this paper that is our results show a short-term interest rate response positively to output gap and exchange rate gap in the case of the Saudi Arabia. The response of interest rate and monetary policy response to the inflation gap is found to be positive in the case of Bahrain, Kuwait, but negative for the United Arab Emirates. And finally, the response of interest rate to the financial stability found to be negative and significant for all countries, right, except for the case of Saudi Arabia. So that was our main conclusion from this paper. So I would like to thank you so much for your time, your interest, and it's time for questions. So back to the
Thank you very much.
And the chair of the session.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed and Dr. Ismail, for both.
Thank you. I will stop sharing my screen.
For those interesting presentations that are related and covering different countries. I'd like to introduce also Dr. Mouawiya, who is the director of ISER at Zayed University, for a few comments on both papers.
Thank you, Samer. Thank you, Ahmed and Ismail, for the really, really nice presentations. Since I was not given the chance to read your papers, so I will rely on general comments based on what I heard now. And my purpose is really the benefit of the overall discussion. So we start with the first paper by Dr. Ismail Jansh. The paper proposes a method of measuring connectedness based on assessing the decomposition of forecast error variance into parts attributed to various variables in the system. So this is very important because for policymakers, considering the connectedness of currency and their characteristics, it's conducive to predicting the effectiveness of monetary policies. They answer that, does the impact of policy action extend to other regions or remain confined to the local market? Very important in international finance. For investors also, it's very helpful to identify more arbitrage opportunities. Actually, I'm really a fan of this type of analysis. I have a few general notes. The first note, which is definitely, Ismail knows this very well. The method is very useful. However, it ignores economic mechanism of connectedness. And this is the problem with whenever we use VAR. My second point about the fragile 5 currencies. Those are just part of the foreign exchange market. There are other major currencies, major players, whose effect may be embedded in the currencies of the fragile 5. It might be captured in the interconnectedness part of the variance. The third point, which is related to number 2, is about the volatility spillover across markets. Of course, this is large when the market interdependence is high, especially at bad time. The fragile five may have a strong economic ties with other countries outside this small group. So mention the US or European Union or others. Therefore, we may wonder if the results change significantly when including other important currencies in the sample. I will finish with this paper with a question to Dr. Ismail about the ordering. I did not think about this, but I believe you can answer it if about the volatility spillover indices. Are they robust to the ordering in the VAR or not? The second paper is also very, very interesting, but with this paper, we'll go back to the main issue we discuss whenever anyone says anything about monetary policies in the GCC. So this paper analyzes the interaction between monetary stability and financial stability by introducing a stability index to monitor financial exposure and crises. And the main question of the paper, if the index can serve to predict financial crises. It's very interesting and I really enjoyed it. And as I said, my main concern is the fact that the GCC countries maintain a policy of open capital account and pegged or nearly pegged exchange rates, therefore reducing their freedom to run independent monetary policies. So the GCC interest rates closely mirror the US rate. So, and this is not only related to the exchange rate and the interest rate and monetary policy. Many studies show that the US monetary policy has very strong impact on not only broad money, but on non-oil activities, on inflation in the GCC and on other important variables which are in the Taylor equation you presented. The issue is very important if for people who attended the last session. The last session was about diversification. So giving the discussion in that one, if we think about diversification, and if the private sector is to lead the diversification efforts in the region, it will never work when the monetary policy is outsourced, because this becomes very expensive for GCC to be able to set short-term interest rates. And this is important to manage domestic cost of capital and inflation. If you leave it to the US, it's always costly and you cannot diversify the economy. So this is very important question to address in the paper, along with your discussion, is you need to find a way to discuss this dependence on GCC, and probably you can invent the Taylor rule to apply to GCC countries as well. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed both papers.
Thank you, Dr. Mouawiya, very much for these useful comments despite the short notice. I think we have very few minutes left, so maybe it's time to open the floor to the audience, but please make sure that you make your comments and questions very specific given the time constraint. Thank you.
Can I say something?
Very brief, if you mind.
Yes, by the way, Mouawiya, wonderful comments. I'm really impressed. Thank you. I tried to hide the paper so you wouldn't notice all the mistakes that I've done. By the way, Mohammed, for some reason, says in the last 1 hour, he can hear everything, but he cannot talk, for some reason. So yes, wonderful observation. This is a univariate model, so it ignores other variables. we're trying to, this was our extension actually, I did not mention that. We would like to extend the data period and also possibly other variables. Problem is, as you also noticed, can we really confine ourselves to these countries, especially given the fact that the interconnectedness is low? Should we include other countries like US? Very good point. And if I may say something to Ahmed in support of what Mouawiya said, in a paper with Ali Termos and George Nerfel in, I forget the year, but we found that GCC economies cannot have independent monetary policy of the United States. So looking at GCC economies monetary policy in exclusion of the United States is very, very difficult. That's all. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Ahmed, quick comments, please.
All right. So I just have, I start with my comments and my reply to Dr. Mouawiya and Dr. Ismail. Actually, we have thought about this issue. And also we have thought about several augmentation of the Taylor rule by including several variables. And one of the key variables that we want to include, for example, that is oil prices, because we know that is GCC is mainly depending on oil, and this has an impact on the exchange rate, the budget, and everything, the main economies of the GCC country. Also, you highlighted the issue. Yeah, you highlighted the issue of connectivity with the US. With the US interest rate and monetary policy by the Fed, but the problem is, as I highlighted at the beginning, that is we do have a very short data period available, so we wouldn't be able to include too many variables within the same model, because actually this is consuming too many degree of freedom, and we wouldn't be able to have a stable and more reliable result. So we are in between, because we do have a short period and we want to include many variables as much as we can, but we can't actually. So, but actually we will do this as a robustness check, and actually it would be very interesting to see whether our results will be more robust if we include the policy rate for the US or not. So this is something definitely we will go forward, and I would like to thank you both for these suggestions.
Thank you very much.
My comments regarding just a quick comments for Ismail, because I'm really interested in the financial connectedness, and I have several people in this area related to Mouawiya comments. Actually, the connectedness literature review mostly ignore the economic environment and the economic prospect within which this monetary and financial interaction happening. So it's very, very important to highlight the economic background and the economic context within this financial connectedness. And according to the literature, there are several, or actually three main channels through which the financial contagion and financial connectedness happen. So it's trade, financial flows, as well as financial uncertainty. So it would be very interesting to see the trade between those countries, whether there is a very high trade or a capital flow between those countries, what type of connection between those countries or channels through which the financial contagion and financial information transmit from one country to another. One final comment, because you highlighted about the portfolio diversification and investor decisions. So most of the literature within the area of financial connectedness, starting by looking at the Diebold and Yalmaz approach spillover, but actually they move from Diebold and Yilmaz to a more recent approach, which is by Baronik and Khalil in 2018, which actually investigate the connectedness within frequency domain rather than a time domain. Because you know that is investors are more, some of the investors are more concerned about the short run rather than the long run and the other way around. So it would be more interesting to see how those countries are connected in both short as well as long run horizon. So I'd like to thank you so much, and I'm sorry if I just take much of your time.
So let's hear from the audience, perhaps. Any questions or comments that are very specific, please? Thank you.
Dr. Semer, in the Q&A section, there is a question from Professor Dr. Ahmed Qadri Bahloul for Dr. El Zayed. Depending the result for KSA, what is your policy recommendation? And there's another question as well on the analysis period includes normal quarters in addition to quarters specific of COVID-19, how the analysis captured this issue.
Thank you, Sherry.
Okay, so thank you so much. So in terms of, I will comment in terms of the first comment, that is what would be the policy recommendation for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We have, based on our results, that is Saudi Arabia is not targeting in inflation. It doesn't, as we have seen from the results, that there is no response from the interest rate to inflation targeting. But actually, we have seen that is Saudi Arabia is more concerned about the output gap as well as the change in exchange rate, and that is, these are the two main channels or the two main concerns for Saudi Arabia, and the Saudi interest rates response to the change in output gap as well as the changes in the interest rate. I also results confirm that is all right. Saudi Arabia has no response for the changes in financial stress index. And I believe this might be the case because they do have a very little to do with the financial interest and the financial instability within the GCC country. From our constructed financial stress indices, we have seen that is during the last 10 years, all right, Saudi Arabia have witnesses a very low level of financial volatility and fluctuation. And maybe that's why they have more interest in managing or using monetary policy to manage the change in the exchange rate as well as the output gap. Regarding the second comment in terms of including the 2 quarters from the COVID-19 period within the normal range. So actually, the period that has been included for COVID-19 is actually the last 2 quarters, which is Q1 and Q2, because our sample ended in the second quarter of 2020. And we all know that is COVID-19 pandemic has started at the end of, or the start of 2020. So we only have the last 2 observations during the COVID-19 pandemic period. But one thing, we don't believe this would have a very severe impact on our results, but also as a robustness check, we can do one of the 2 things. We can just delete the last 2 observations, rerun our analysis, and see whether we got robustness results or a similar results to our original analysis. Or alternatively, what we can do is we can add a dummy variable for this last 2 period and see whether this has an impact on our interest rate or not. And then we can go to the discussion from there. So actually, this is a preliminary results. So we have just finished the paper, writing the results down. So, and this is the first event to present our paper. So we are very thankful for your very interesting comments. We will take these comments into consideration, and definitely we will adjust and enhance our discussion and the paper based on your comments. So thank you so much, and I hope I answered your questions.
Thank you very much. Perhaps should we have time for one or two questions, or?
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay.
And I think we've addressed the questions in the Q&A. So
all right, perfect. So given the time and the fact that there are other sessions ongoing at the same time, I'd like to thank very much all, both participants, both presenters and our discussant for their excellent presentations on an important topic, especially given the aggregate shocks we see nowadays coming from not just financial markets, but also from real economy in the form of health shocks. And I also would like to thank ERF staff for organizing such a conference, a much needed conference focused on GCC countries.